Welcome to Talking Feds One-on-One, deep dive discussions with national figures about the most fascinating and consequential issues defining our culture and shaping our lives. I'm your host, Harry Littman. Welcome to another Talking Feds One-on-One. I'm always pleased when I can welcome the indomitable, the inimitable Marcy Wheeler, who famously writes at Empty Wheel and is an American independent journalist specializing in national security and civil liberties. She has also published in many outlets, including The New Republic, Motherboard, and appears frequently on television and radio, and is the author of Anatomy of Deceit, a primer on the CIA leak investigation. But I'm especially pleased to welcome her today. We are, all of us, on the day before the inauguration of Donald Trump, frustrated and chagrined at the apparent vacuum of information about Jack Smith's findings in the Mar-a-Lago case, what is Volume 2, but that hasn't been released to the public. And it's certainly true that our knowledge is spotty and incomplete. However, it's not the case that it's barren. And here's where Marcy comes to the rescue, as she has done before, to dig deep into the evidence and explain what it tells us about what Volume 2 will really include if and when it's released, and more generally, what the public record already reveals about the documents case itself, which was true, as you'll remember, for Volume 1, when we already had such a wealth of information, especially from the October filing that Smith had given to Judge Chutkan. So, Marcy Wheeler, thanks as always for joining.
Good to be on.
I want to just start because your blog, and everyone, if you want, you can follow along Marcy's entry at Empty Wheel Net, is necessarily elliptical. And we talk about this and we talk about that. So just to sort of situate it in the overall sweep of the case, which begins the morning really, when he's leaving the White House and goes through a long period of kind of bobbing and weaving that eventually gives way to obstruction, subpoena, search, and patent obstruction. The charges, recall everyone, there are four that he took, but he willfully retained national defense information, that he conspired to obstruct with Nauta and De Oliveira. He withheld specific records, and then they deleted and he conspired to delete the surveillance footage. There's that whole episode. Anyway, Marcy, I want to get into the specifics that you're able to richly document, but just give us the broad sweep of the case, what you're able to discern. We know pretty well, not so well, not at all, etc., in terms of what the Volume 2, if we ever see it, will go through.
So what we have pretty well documented, starting with a narrative that the government used to respond to some bogus claims that Trump made, is how they started looking for these three documents: the Kim Jong-un letters, the Sharpie map, and the letter from Obama.
The archives.
The archives. And over the course of the summer, kept going back and forth with people like Pat Philbin and Mark Meadows. They said, we're going to tell Congress. That escalated. People like Eric Hirschman came in, Alex Cannon. So we have a really pretty good description of that process leading up to the delivery of the boxes in January 2021, or the NARA picking up the boxes in January 2021. And we've got primary documents, and we've got some interviews that assist that. For the period between then and the search, we're probably back relying on the indictment and the.
Can I interrupt? This might just mean me, but do you mean January 2022?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I always make that mistake.
That's okay. Yeah. So go ahead.
So the first year, right? We've got now, thanks to Todd Blanche, the soon-to-be Deputy Attorney General, they FOIA'd all these documents, and so we've got all of the back and forth communications with people like Mark Meadows, right? And some key interviews. That brings us to January, February 2022. We see what happened with the investigation largely through the indictment and the search warrant affidavit We've got 3 versions of that, so that's pretty detailed at this point. We see in some discovery descriptions of the video that was obtained. That's not in my blog post, but there are lots of lots of discussions about discovery that explain what was obtained. And then starting after this, we have incredible detail about the search on August 8th, 2022. And the day after, Molly Michael reaches out to the FBI and says, there's 3 more documents, please get them. There's a 302 describing that. We have details in a dispute between Stan Woodward and Jay Bratt about what happened that fall. The important thing, as we will discuss, is the way in which Kash Patel delayed his own testimony for 2 months. But there's also a very rich description of how Tim Parlatore served both as a lawyer and as a records custodian. And that's super interesting if you want to know how Trump obstructed this investigation. Then you have a few other interviews. You have the interviews from Walt Nauta. Both of them are May and June of 2022.
One of them is in the grand jury, correct?
Yeah, one grand jury and one FBI interview. And those just lay out in more detail what he's alleged to have done. And then there's a very long interview with a woman named Chamberlain Harris, who had a box with classified documents in it, but she wasn't, when we get the report, they're going to say she didn't have the mens rea to steal and keep these documents. I mean, she was just doing something you would do in an office all the time. But it's a very interesting interview for other reasons. There's a few more fragments of interview with people at NARA and a few other people who watched things happen. So that's the scope of what we have. So we have a great description of what led us to the boxes in January, February 2022, and some description of what led to the search, an incredible description of the search itself, some description of the obstruction of the investigation in fall of 2022, and a few of the interviews that led up to the obstruction case, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And that's great. And that material, you just have to hope that the Senate is aware of, because some of it will be very directly involved, potentially.
So it's very important to Kash Patel.
To Kash Patel. Okay, let's try to dig deeper into, and for listeners, the blog's invaluable as always, but for many individual spots where it digs deep, and I want to go into several of those because they really do recapitulate what we know when people are despairing and thinking we know nothing. We've already gotten a great deal of information about the investigation. I want to see the report, but we know a fair bit already. And I was going to jump in where you jump in, but how about giving us an overview of what you've learned with your deep dive into the public record?
Yeah, I mean, I start from 2 premises. One is what we saw in volume 1. We didn't get a lot of new information. We got a few texts between Scott Perry and Jeffrey Clark.
Which, by the way, had only emerged in the last month before it was written, right? So that stood to reason.
They were not released to investigators until December 2023. So they got them a year before, but after the indictment. And so you couldn't build them into the indictment. One of the key detail in them is that Jeffrey Clark, after reviewing the highly classified election interference filing from the intelligence community, told Scott Perry there's nothing there to help then President Trump and tomorrow soon to be President Trump out. So even Jeffrey Clark said there's no there, right? And then the only other really substantive new thing in volume 1 is a bunch of quotes from fake electors saying, yeah, they told us they were never going to use this, which is one of the reasons I think why you don't see charges at the federal level, because they were all lied to.
Of the electors.
The electors. It varies by state. I mean, in Pennsylvania, they covered themselves. None of those people committed a crime pretty much. Whereas, Michigan, it's different because they had to be in the house, in the state house. That's what's new. And so one of my premises is Jack Smith isn't going to have given us a bunch new in volume 2 either. I mean, Robert Hur, if people remember, it was a 388-page report. There was no crime. Right. So it was 388 pages of, here's a document that was very damaging. but we didn't charge it for this reason. Here's a document that was very, very damaging, but I'm only claiming that by applying a double standard to Joe Biden than DOJ did with Ronald Reagan in his diaries, and 388 pages of that. Like, Jack Weiss could have done that, given what we saw. He could have done that. And as we spoke the last time we spoke.
Jack Smith, right? Because there's also David Weiss.
Sorry.
That's all right. David Weiss is another. He's just come out with his report, by the way, on Hunter.
Which is garbage. But
yeah.
Jack Smith could have done that. Could have done what Rob Hurd did. For example, tell us why the FBI believed there was a tie between executive clemency for Roger Stone and some document classified secret about Emmanuel Macron. That was my big ask. I'm not getting it. I can tell you that I'm not getting it. So we're not getting a lot of new information in volume 2. The big thing we'll get in volume 2 is a description of why they didn't charge 18 U.S.C. 2071, which is taking documents from DC. A lot of people need that explanation. You and I think, agree on this, but go ahead and explain why you don't think that would happen, why you couldn't charge a president.
Sure. Well, let me first explain why I think people are so eager to see it, because that charge, like 2383 in the Chutkin case, includes a provision that if convicted, the convict can no longer serve in higher office, so it would have been disqualifying. But I think they just didn't have enough about his actual, in the chaos of the day where he's actually leaving, they couldn't stick him with the same kind of intent and detailed sort of taking that obviously once things are down in Mar-a-Lago and he wants to preserve and he wants to obstruct the attempts of the government to retrieve, they've got in chapter and verse, including with cooperating witnesses. So I just, 2071 is about spiriting it all away from Washington, and my sense is they just don't have it in rich detail on that crazy day. Would that be your sense as well?
Yeah, and it's like insurrection, because one of the problems with insurrection is it implies an attack on the government. When Trump launched an insurrection, he was the government. And same here, like, how can you prove that he stole...
Which is an actual point, one of the points that Smith actually makes in volume 1.
In volume 1.
Yeah.
And I think you would see a similar discussion in volume 2, which says it's really like, because the documents were out of the White House by noon on January 20th, so 4 years ago today,
right?
Documents are on a plane going to Mar-a-Lago. At that point, he still has legal access to them.
And there's almost a metaphysical issue, like government, president, government break,
right?
And getting right.
Although he's already busy, like, reversing the TikTok ban before he's president. So, but the other reason I think people really wanted 2071 on the table is that's what you can charge in DC. If you're doing the retaining documents charge, it's a lot harder to argue that you can do it in DC. I mean, there's the obstruction precedent in the DC circuit, but also all of the refusing to give it back stuff. All of Trump saying, no, I'm going to keep these documents. Here's my 15 documents. I've got another 35. That all happened in Florida. And so I think that they probably, there might be some really interesting discussion about jurisdiction in there, which says, here's why we charged in Florida and got stuck with Aileen Cannon. That's the stuff we may get that may be useful. But even the volume 1 was, in my mind, inadequate. For example, about why they didn't charge co-conspirators, why they treated witness tampering as a litigation difficulty rather than a declination. Like, it's a crime, Why did Trump not get charged with witness tampering for attacking Milley or attacking Mike Pence when he knew they were going to be witnesses in a trial against him?
That's right. Historians are going to be untangling so much, but the very fateful decision to go to the Southern District of Florida was also and I wonder whether Volume 2 will go through the discussion of concerns about, at the time, if venue was not proper in DC, they were worried it would be the death knell for the case. Whereas we now understand, because it's been clarified, that no, you file in a bad venue, you can refile. But they weren't sure of that. And so there was that risk as well. That, and I think as part of a cluster of conduct from the department of wanting to be punctilious and seem to be above politics. So something about filing in DC would have looked a little bit too hungry, maybe. All right. So all the things we would like to see, we don't know if we will, but you've got a few things that you're pretty confident are in there.
Right. And I wrote this post. I started this post because a number of people were surprised by Volume 1 by Jack Smith's citation to unsealed court filings describing the executive privilege fight, which a number of journalists work hard to unseal. I think that the Politico guys were the first people to do it, Kyle Cheney and Josh Gerstein, and then Charlie Savage came in and gave it the imprimatur of New York Times. It was unsealed. We got it in October. And so we knew all of that. And that was the kind of thing, if we think that we can make an issue out of Trump obstructing legal issues, we should have done that in October before the election, right? And we didn't. And so there's some call now saying, we don't know about the back and forth between Trump and NARA, the archives, or the FBI, how they got brought in, or any of the other back and forth. And in fact, we do know that.
Yeah, I mean, you really get to a very valuable document, an FBI report, the so-called 302. And I just want to remind everyone that, he diddles them, the archives, for like 15 months. And at the beginning of which the DOJ doesn't even know about things. They finally inform them. They get involved. They file a subpoena to which he doesn't fully comply. Then the search warrant. But that whole back and forth is where emerges the intent in the case, as charged in the indictment, to in fact, obstruct and keep it from him. So you've got a real golden doc here that I hadn't remembered at all.
There are a couple of docs, I think. So, like, just as one example, Trump accused Joe Biden of interfering in this case, and he said Jonathan Sue, who was at the time in the White House counsel office, Jonathan Sue, ginned up this case. It was a completely bogus claim. But as a result, Trump did. Trump literally, narked himself out. Trump went and FOIA'd all of these documents. There are dozens in there. There are more than 60 documents, many of which were not previously public. And they include the entire back and forth between NARA and Trump and people like
NARA being the archives.
Yeah, the archives. And people like Mark Meadows. And so Trump liberates all these documents to claim Jonathan Sue, hammered me. This is a political thing. And then, and one of the things I link in my post is the government response, Jack Smith's response. And they only released another couple of documents. They released one from the White House records management guy.
Wait, who's they who released it?
The Jack Smith. So Trump released all of these
Trump gets it on FOIA, and it's public once he gets it.
It's 60 documents, Harry. I mean, there's a million in there, dozens of documents that are not actually all that helpful to Donald Trump. And then the government response says, okay, let me give you part of Mark Meadows' 302. And they make it clear it's Mark Meadows because they say it's the former chief of staff. And let me give you this White House records management guy. And let me give you what is almost certainly Eric Hirschman's 302. And between those documents, like, one of the things they show is the entire conspiracy theory they said about this was, Jonathan Sue, White House counsel under Biden. He pushed this investigation. They show that the reason Jonathan Sue got involved was, one, because Mark Meadows got involved. Two, because somebody who's probably Pat Philbin, who is deputy White House counsel under Trump, got him involved. And three, because Mark Meadows tried to go around all of that to this White House records management guy.
And now at what stage? What stage is Meadows doing this?
Summer 2021.
So he himself, and by the way, he's been very ably represented. I think the best of everyone.
I agree.
In this whole thing. So at this time, he's trying to do what at this point personally in 2021? Is it?
So we see a number of people involved. We see definitely Pat Philbin involved. Pat Cipollone maybe a little bit more checked out. There's a couple of other people who, were close to Trump. Alex Cannon is involved. And so you don't get to see their names in these filings, but you wouldn't get to see them in the report either, right? But we know those people are involved. And at one point, the head of the archives says to Mark Meadows, well, if you don't, I mean, because remember, this started when the archives said, we need the Kim Jong-un documents, we need the Sharpie hurricane document showing that it didn't go to Alabama, or it did, I forget which. And we need the letter that Obama left for Trump. And that's where this started. They said, we know these 3 documents exist. We didn't get them. Give them to us. And there was this back and forth. And
whom do they serve that up to?
To Trump's archives representatives. So that includes the 2 Pats and Mark Meadows, and I think another one of the White House counsel. And so at one point, the archives says to Mark Meadows, well, if you guys don't get me these documents, and again, we're talking 3 unclassified well, I guess the Kim Jong-un is probably classified, but these 3 documents, which are fairly innocuous, if you don't get me these 3 documents, I'm going to have to report to Congress that you've destroyed the boxes of documents. Because, and the White House records guy also knew he knew there were like 2 dozen. So in the summer of 2021, the archive says to Mark Meadows, I'm going to have to tell Congress. And Mark Meadows launches into overdrive and tries to go to the White House, tries to go to, Pat Philbin is involved. And that's this rolling process.
Tries to go at then the Biden White House where Jonathan Sue is now working.
And that's a rolling process where all the sane people around, or marginally sane people around Trump, are like, I mean, and there's this classic line, nowhere near the best line in the in what we believe to be the Eric Hirschman 302, but there's this classic line in the Hirschman 302 where on November 21st, 2021, and he keeps trying, and he gets one of the kids involved, and I'm sure Alex Cannon is involved, but on November 21st, 2021, he goes and meets Trump. Trump is wearing golf clothes. He says, don't give them a noble cause to indict you, which sounds like Eric Hirschman.
Yeah.
Because they will.
Eric Hirschman, the famous, you're going to need a fucking criminal defense lawyer is what he says to
Yeah, and the reason I'm virtually certain the 302 is Eric Hirschman is because, he calls, there's somebody in there who's almost certainly Boris Epstein, and the witness calls him a fucking oops.
Oh, no.
And then he similarly calls somebody who, and this is where we get into the important disclosures that are already out there. He calls somebody who is virtually certain to be Kash Patel, somebody who insinuated himself into the White House because of the congressman he worked for, and somebody who was the only person making claims that everything was declassified. He said that guy was crazy and wanted to get a promotion to a job he wasn't qualified for, which could be either CIA, FBI, because we know those both happened.
And let me just underscore for people, because it's really of current importance, that Patel attested that Trump had magically waved a wand and declassified all these documents. So that's actually going to come up in his hearings if they have his hearings. Go ahead. Sorry.
Right. So there is a 8-page narrative of that back and forth in this filing that the government used to respond to this bogus claim that Joe Biden pushed this investigation. And it doesn't link, my post I linked to, but it cites to any of these 60 documents. And these are the emails, right? There's an email from person 27 who the filing makes quite clear is Mark Meadows. There's this email from person 27 panicking because NARA is about to tell Congress about all of these documents, right? That's what you want. There it is. All the primary documents collected there thanks to Todd Blanche.
And we have not just references to the same in the 302. We have the 60 documents. Thanks for Todd. Here's the email itself, etc.
Yeah, I mean, there it is. These are the primary documents plus the 8-page narrative. And then the government added the White House records management guy, maybe 6 pages from Mark Meadows' 302, and then the 10 pages that may or may not be Eric Hirschman, but are hilarious to read regardless. Everyone should read them. There's a reference to Tom Fitton.
And this is in your blog, right?
Yeah.
If you will. They're links.
That I've been talking about for weeks. It's like, we know that this report is going to talk about Kash Patel, partly because when they said, well, you can't release the report, they said it's going to cause problems for our nominations. And there's literally no one else except for the lawyers like Todd Blanche who come before Congress. Like Susie Wiles is in there, but she's done. She'll start tomorrow, right? She's She's the chief of staff. There's no confirmation process. So we know there's nobody in the first volume that goes before the Senate for confirmation. And Todd Blanche does, right? Todd Blanche is nominated to be Deputy Attorney General. There's not even much from John Sauer in this. It's mostly Todd Blanche. But even Todd Blanche, remember, he wasn't the lawyer for the beginning part of this. It was Jim Trusty and other people. So really, the one person we know that is central to this process is aspiring FBI Director Kash Patel, which brings me to the second document, which is really useful going forward, which is, and let me take a step back. This document, volume 2, is not coming out. Aileen Cannon's going to release some opinion on Wednesday that will preserve her opportunity to be promoted to the 11th Circuit or maybe even directly to SCOTUS.
And as she said to the DOJ, what's the urgency here?
I've got a career to position myself for. And people should understand, it wasn't Merrick Garland who made that decision. It was Jack Smith who said, I recommend you not release it. Now, given what we saw in the first volume, maybe he's just really, really trying hard, partly in the interest of the people who still want to work at DOJ, to make it look like they did everything right. So if they try and fire, on the January 6th side, there are people that Trump will want to fire that are not senior executive service who will be harder to fire. So if they do not go quietly, they will have some interesting lawsuits about the conduct of the investigation. That's less true.
Let me interject here. The lawsuits are coming on both sides, but it's not a judgment call. If there are, I'm just putting on my DOJ hat, you can't release a report when the case is pending. You just they couldn't have done that. Although, so he recommended it.
Mueller did.
Well,
no, he did. He did, because he released it and redacted the Roger Stone stuff and redacted the Prigozhin troll stuff. It was a big stink in the Roger Stone thing. So he actually did release it. And in fact, one of my favorite lines in the entire Mueller report is a line that said, I actually didn't come to a prosecutorial decision about whether Roger Stone conspired with Russia. I referred it to DC USAO, and that footnote was only unsealed literally 2 days before the 2020 election. So that was all in the document, and because remember his trial.
Yeah, but it's not Mueller here. We're talking we're talking Barr. I mean, it's the decision whether, of course, when your investigation is over, you give a report to the AG. Yeah. But it would be an orthodox thing not to release a report about a pending.
But it's case. Right, yeah. And whatever it is, it's Jack Smith saying there's still and the other thing people need two other things people need to understand, and you probably can say a lot more about this than me. One is Aileen Cannon's decision last summer was that everything that happened after November 18th, 2022 was unconstitutional. If that's true, even writing a report may be unconstitutional, and the only basis you have to write the report is the very credible appeal saying no one else believes that this appointment is invalid. He's done. He still has to write a report. So you need to sustain the appeal at least so long as you do to write the report, because otherwise Aileen Cannon's decision holds, which is that everything that happens, Jack Smith can't do anything after November 18th, 2022. So that's one thing.
All right. Well, we are getting way into the satellite, but I want to answer it anyway in case people wonder, because the position of the DOJ would be, even if he's not a lawfully appointed special counsel, he can be a dude whom the Attorney General has said, please write something up. And now it comes to the Attorney General whether to release. So they would have a repository. Yeah, but
the final important question is, everyone's like, he should just pardon or dismiss the appeal. Pardon is fine. Dismissing the appeal, who are you going to dismiss it in front of? You have to just, when Bill Barr tried to dismiss the Mike Flynn case in 2020 before Emmett Sullivan, Emmett Sullivan was like, I'm not going to do that, And that fight went on for another 6 months.
Yeah, and all it would need to do is 6 hours. But I think the answer is, and because we'll see this, because we'll see it, them try to do something, would be the 11th Circuit, I think. But that's part and parcel of everything that's happening.
There's one Kash Patel document, which is the 302, that may or may not be Eric Hirschman calling him, saying that there was no declassification. Yeah. And if that's right, then it means Kash Patel lied to help Donald Trump retain these documents. But the other thing is, there was a big fight between Stanley Woodward, who represented
Everybody.
Kash Patel, everybody. Kash Patel, Walt Nauta, and this seditionist named Kelly Meggs, who may be pardoned tomorrow. And those three are all really important. But because Kelly Meggs, by the way, was buddies with Roger Stone. So in fall of 2022, when Aileen Cannon has said you can't do anything with the documents, one of the only things they could do was chase down Kash Patel's claim that Trump had declassified everything. And so they gave him a subpoena in September of 2022. And Kash, not working through a lawyer, said, hey, can I have a couple weeks? And them being, sound lawyers, and this happens all the time, they're like, yeah, a couple weeks. And then a couple weeks later, who is his lawyer? It turns out to be Stan Woodward. The day he's starting the Oath Keepers trial, which was like a 2-month trial. This was the first of the major sedition trials. Kelly Meggs was the second most important person after Stuart Rhodes. The day he starts the sedition trial, he's like, Woodward calls up and says, hey, can we get an indefinite delay of this subpoena because I'm busy with the sedition trial? And Kash testifies in October. Like, the government's like, no, you just started a sedition trial. What do you knew the sedition trial was out there. And so Kash testifies, and this is all in my post. Kash testifies in October at some point, and the aspiring FBI director repeatedly invokes the Fifth. The aspiring FBI director repeatedly says he cannot testify or else he will incriminate himself about this documents case.
And in particular about his claim that Donald Trump had declassified all these things.
Right. And remember, too, that Kash was involved in the Crossfire Hurricane thing. And we're not even Jack Smith yet at this point. Then the government comes back and goes to Beryl Howe and says, hey, we want him to testify. She says, you have to immunize him. And so they do that. And now we're like in Jack Smith's first day. Actually, we're still before Jack Smith. Then the government is like, great, let's do it. And Stan Woodward again says, I've got the sedition trial. And the government says, no, today, like, you knew about the sedition trial. So there's a very long description of how, as part of a fight between Stan Woodward and Jay Bratt, who used to be in charge of all of this.
And as one of the casualties, by the way, you wonder about the brain drain with Trump coming in, a great lawyer who's now left.
Yep. And so because there's this fight between Stan Woodward and Jay Bratt, that gave Jack Smith the opportunity to say, it was almost a 2-month fight to get Kash Patel's testimony. And the main reason it's in there is because it's background to the Stan Woodward fight. Now, by the way, this is an important issue.
And we don't, and it's not something, we don't know yet what he says in the grand jury.
No, we don't. That is one of the main things.
That'll be pretty interesting.
That
right?
might be in, and here's one of the things. I mean, I want to get into like the pictures that we have and some of the other things we have. But DOJ, so no longer Jack Smith because they're all off the case. The people in Florida, the people at the appellate division, DOJ, the people who are arguing this, have over and over again said, here is the constitutional equities that belong to the chair and ranking members of the judiciary committees. So we're talking Chuck Grassley, Dick Durbin, Jim Jordan, and Jamie Raskin. And this, to me, seemed like an invitation for Raskin or Durbin to say, hey, I'd like to submit an amicus, especially for Durbin. Because Durbin, we know enough to know that there's stuff about Kash Patel in there. And Durbin should be able to say, look, I need this information because I have a constitutional duty to advise and consent about whether or not Kash Patel can be FBI director. And that, I think, would have been a smarter approach for Congress. Like the HJC submitted a letter, Merrick Garland needs to release it. I'd rather have Jamie Raskin submit an amicus, him alone, saying, I have a constitutional duty to oversee whether these special counsels are garbage. And Trump has said that this one is garbage. And so it's important for me to see the report to see whether it's garbage like several other ones. That would have been a really plausible argument for Jamie Raskin to make. And instead, in the vacuum, Trump kept saying, Jamie Raskin and Dick Durbin are these partisans and they just want to leak it. And that is the basis on which Aileen Cannon will eventually say, oh, I'm sorry, I couldn't release it until after Donald Trump came in. And so,
although we were positing that she wouldn't have signed off on anything saying, prohibiting it, but I take your point.
Yeah. I mean, now here's the other thing to consider, right? So Jay Bratt is in this fight with Woodward. Jay Bratt self-disclosed to OPR, Office of Professional Responsibility, about these accusations by Stan Woodward. And to the extent that he's gone, so OPR has limited ability to still chase it, although with Jay Bybee, they did on torture successfully, interestingly. I learned a lot from that.
By which time he was a Ninth Circuit judge, all very complicated situation.
But because these people want to go after Jack Smith and Jay Bratt, they can't do that without saving this document.
Yes, that's a really good point.
I mean, the way to get the document is to say, well, Jim Jordan, you want to go after him, give us the document.
Talking Feds is supported by the Brennan Center for Justice. In this new political era, the Brennan Center will do what they do best: defend the Constitution and the rule of law. They're prepared to fight against presidential overreach and will continue advocating for reforms to resist weaponized government, stop billionaires from corrupting our elections, and ensure every eligible American has the freedom to vote. Stay informed by visiting BrennanCenter.org.
All right. I'm concerned that you mesmerized me, and I'm concerned we've spent a lot of time in the weeds. Any of our listeners who were already with me in the weeds, I think, have gotten a lot out of it. I want to ask you about one more document, and we have your pictures.
One picture, my picture.
And then I just want to pull back so that people see in the sweep of the time period covered by the indictment, sort of what we have and what we don't in terms of the public record. But I did want to ask you a really important document that people forget we have: the grand jury transcript, interview transcript of Walt Nauta, who first comes up to D.C. and lies. Well, anyway, so that's something we have. That's an important part, it seems to me, because so much of the alleged obstruction goes through Nauta and De Oliveira. Can you briefly just remind us about that testimony?
Yeah, and we also have this woman, Chamberlain Harris, who may actually be coming back into the White House. And again, we don't get this in D.C. We have the entire FBI transcripts of Harris and Nauta and the entire grand jury testimony of Nauta. And the Nauta stuff shows that Nauta was like, oh, I don't remember, I didn't do that. So it gives substance to what the indictment alleges. And you can see how his story changed even between the May 2022 FBI interview and, if I remember correctly, June 2022 grand jury appearance, right? So that is the basis of the charges against Walt Nauta. Those are public. You can go read them. I've linked them in my document. Chamberlain Harris is possibly even more interesting. She's this woman who is ordered by another person, and some of her 302s show up as well. Molly Michael, who was in charge of the office at the time. Bits of her 302s show up. But Chamberlain Harris was ordered by Michael to scan all of these Trump calendars. And that ended up being a little thing that investigators had to chase down. In a report, it might be a declination report, right? We didn't charge her because she was just following orders and she didn't really know any of this was classified. Totally fair decision, right? And she was very cooperative. What's interesting about her transcript is the details. So she describes, they ask her about the lock on the door to the basement storage room. And they say, what about the lock? And she's like, oh. And there's this confusion because what she's describing isn't a lock. It's what you have on your bathroom door. She's like, it's just a round thing, and where you use a knife, a very small screwdriver to, you lock it on your way out the door and you use the screwdriver to get in. It's not a lock at all. And that is, we understand, the lock that was on the storage closet in which Trump had all of these highly classified documents. And so there are bits of her testimony in addition to the story about how, why she scanned it and why she put it under her desk. And it's 190 pages. Like, we don't get anything like that in the DC case. It's 190 pages, and it's really important, down to the screwdriver opening the door to all of the classified documents. And then, as I said, there are little bits of, say, Molly Michaels, other people from the archives, other FBI agents. There's an extensive search because another challenge that Trump made based on this conspiracy theorist was that the order of the documents got mussed. And so, it's a spoliation of evidence. And so that resulted not just in a very extensive documentary record about how the search happened, who did it, where the boxes were, what pictures were taken. There's a description of the guy in New York shutting down the security footage in Mar-a-Lago and then turning it back on so they could watch the FBI. So it's actually fascinating historic document, but you can also see a lot more about where Trump was storing these documents, because the FBI provided documentation to show that they didn't deliberately disorder any of the documents.
All right, so now let me stop you, ask you just to describe this. By the way, we have, if this were a CLE, we'd have a companion reading material. It's just go to emptywheel.net, and we're really following along with what Marcy kind of puts out in black and white. Tell us just about this picture. If it's easy for us to attach it, we will. And then for people who have hung with us this long, I just want to say we'll end by going back to a broader focus and just orienting what we have by period and sort of what we don't. But there's rich documentation, it strikes me, for a big part of the time, but next to nothing for others, etc. And I just want to end, probably should have begun with that, my apologies, listeners, to orient what we're talking about. But we got pictures, we got graphics here, and tell us about it but they're also at the emptywheel.net. Go ahead.
So the government provided pictures to show the process of the search. They provided a log of the photographer's pictures that he took. A lot of those are focused on a blue leather-bound box, which is where the main picture we remember of all these documents on the floor, that's what they were trying to disprove. Only 3 of those documents got charged. Another thing this filing did was say, here's where all the documents we charged were. And as part of that, they showed this other document. And what you can see from the document is the cover sheets of the found documents on the floor next to the box, and several top secret cover sheets. And you see the box, and the box is bubble wrap, a Christmas pillow, and some kind of frame. And under that is where 10 of the charged documents had been stored, in that closet with the pinhole lock that you can open with a screwdriver.
Chinese government would never think to look there. They don't celebrate Christmas.
Right? Under the Christmas pillow and the bubble wrap. And one of the documents in there there's one document that was charged that was classified formerly restricted. And this is not like every other document is a presidential classification, top secret, secure compartmented secret. There's one document that's charged under the Atomic Energy Act, and those documents a president cannot declassify by himself. They involve nuclear weapons, and one of the documents charged is that kind of document, and that document was one of the 10 stored under the bubble wrap and Christmas pillow.
Got it. And again, everyone follow along on emptywheel.net. As always, an incredibly sort of rich deep dive, but it really does. I mean, your blog sets it up with the lack of knowledge of someone who really ought to know, who's really involved in things, a member of Congress. And there's just a lot more that is known than seems to be the common conception. And in particular, it's not just about history, but very much about the prospect of Kash Patel's nomination hearing if it occurs. So as always, Marcy, thanks so much for your public service, kind of alone digging deep and finding stuff that isn't already known to the public, and for your time now spelling it all out to us. Hope to talk to you soon.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to One on One, a weekly conversation series from Talking Feds. If you like what you've heard, please tell a friend to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or wherever they get their podcasts, and please take a moment to rate and review this podcast. You can also subscribe to us on YouTube, where we post full episodes, talking books, and bonus video content. Talking Feds remains one of the very few independent productions out there, so if you like the work we do and are inclined to support the show, joining our Patreon is the best way to do it. Plus, you'll get tons of perks like free access to my LA Times op-eds and the chance to join monthly live Q&A sessions. Thanks for tuning in, and don't worry, as long as you need answers, the Feds will keep talking. Talking Feds One-on-One is produced by Catherine Devine, associate producer Gabriella Glick, sound engineering by Matt McArdle, Rosie Dawn Griffin, Hamza Mehendranathan, David Lieberman, and Emma Maynard are our contributing writers. Production assistance by Akshaj Turbailu and Genesis Magpayo. Our music, as ever, is by the amazing Philip Glass. Talking Feds is a production of Delito LLC. I'm Harry Littman. Talk to you later.